Hello there, I'm Tanya Khazanov, and you are listening to Human and Holy. Today, I'm going to be covering a topic that I have been exploring for years. All signs point to the fact that my entire life has been leading up to this moment. Not to be dramatic, but this is definitely a topic that has been on my heart for a very long time, that I have debated since I am a teenager, that I have explored in the text through sources and conversations with many people far more learned than me for years, and have never really wanted to touch publicly because there is a controversial air around this topic. But recently I've begun to feel that it's precisely when you don't want to touch a topic that's important, but that could have a lot of energy around it, that you need to have the courage to do so anyways. And the reason for that is that I see with this topic in particular, one that is so deeply personal and relevant and meaningful and important to me, I recognize that the lack of honest conversation and transparency and accessible presentation of the sources on this topic is problematic in many ways for the Jewish people and for women who wrestle with this issue too. In the search for truth and when teaching Torah, you cannot have the veil of propriety over your words. You have to be able to address important topics that have real impact on people's lives and connection to Torah and Judaism. And particularly in this topic, I think has a very strong cultural impact on the way that women view themselves vis-a-vis the Torah and their celebration of the Torah. It's important to be able to look at this and get an honest, comprehensive look at the topic from a halachic perspective, from a traditional perspective, and from a hashkafic perspective. When we don't do that, we risk creating a robotic Judaism where people are not able to voice, even internally, their own personal experiences, in this case, a Jewish holiday, and what their experience may be as a woman during this holiday. And on the flip side, we can create real anguish and alienation for those who are given apologetics to explain why they don't dance on Simchas Torah, why women don't dance with the Torah, essentially expressing to them that Simchas Torah is a men's holiday and that their relationship to the Torah is different because of the fact that they're a woman. There is no doubt that the Torah has a different halachic take on men and women's obligations in their Judaism. There is no doubt that there are different roles, according to halachic Judaism, of men and women's place in certain mitzvos or certain fulfillments of the commandments. We're going to take a deeper look at the holiday of Simchas Torah, at the historical and halachic evolution of the dancing on Simchas Torah. And we're also going to look at the halachic evolution of women's connection to actually touching and dancing with the Torah. The importance of this is that when we take a close look at the tradition of women not dancing with the Torah from an Orthodox perspective, we glean insight into why this is, and through that, what impact this tradition has on how we see women's relationship to Simchas Torah. I'm also going to be speaking about the famous encounter between the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. As a Chabad Chassid, this is an incredibly significant encounter. The initial encounter and the letter that the Rebbe sent after to Rabbi Riskin, which I'll be explaining, as well as some of the thought processes that have been sparked within Chassidim or students of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to try to understand the peculiar and rare nature of this exchange. Why is this such a personally meaningful topic to me? Why do I feel called through a force of passion, love, care, and connection to explore this topic with you? I am a woman who loves the Torah. The Torah is one of the, if not the, great love of my life, the object of all of my wrestling, guidance, values. Everything I do on this earth is in relationship with the words and the texts of the Torah. On Simchas Torah, I experience the joy of my Judaism. I experience the joy of my love for the Torah. And as someone who loves to dance, who won't be caught dead sitting at a loved one's wedding, it is only natural for me to take to the dance floor in Simchas Torah, to be involved in a visceral, embodied way in the joyful expression of dancing with the Torah. As a result, I've experienced some measure of pain, or at the very least discomfort, when visiting or participating on Simchas Torah in shuls where the women's side consisted of bleachers to watch the men dance. Being a bystander, watching other people dance has never sat right with me. I felt curious about the halachic sources that differentiate between men dancing with the Torah and women dancing with the Torah. And as someone who defers completely to halachic leaders to understand God's will in my life, it has been very important for me to explore this topic, to understand it from a truly factual, text-based source perspective, so I could understand the hashkafic implications of the majority Orthodox perspective, which is that women do not dance with the Torah. Before recording this episode, I really wanted to understand this issue from a broader perspective within our current culture. I wanted to hear from women on their experiences of Simchas Torah, on how they felt about dancing, how they felt about watching men dance, if they had any desire to dance with the Torah. I just wanted to take the temperature on where women are holding with this. So I polled our Human and Holy community on Instagram, and I was flabbergasted by the response. Because yes, this is an incredibly personal topic to me and one that has always felt extremely significant for me, but I could not have imagined how flooded I would have been with heartfelt, deep, real messages from women who either love watching the men dance on Simchas Torah and feel that that is a true participation for them in the holiday, to women who feel incredibly alienated and anguished by the practice of watching men dance, to so many women that fall in the gradations in between. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those women before we dive into our halachic sources and the story of the Rebbe. So the first very basic question that I asked was simply, do you dance on Simchas Torah? With 4 options. 1 being yes, 1 being I would, but it's not the norm in my shul, 1 being no, I connect differently, and 1 being I enjoy watching the men dance. 276 people responded to this poll, which is a lot. 30% said, yes, I dance on Simchas Torah. That's 84 women. 24% said I would, but it's not the norm in my shul. That's 67 women. 17% said, no, I connect differently. That's 47 women. And 28% said, I enjoy watching the men dance. That's 78 women. Again, the question was simply, do you dance on Simchas Torah? And in this episode, we're going to be differentiating between dancing on Simchas Torah and dancing with the Torah on Simchas Torah. Based on the literal flood of messages that I received, I began to see a thread, and I'm going to loosely define them in 5 categories of women, 5 different experiences that women have on Simchat Torah. The first one is the woman who not only loves watching the men dance on Simchas Torah, but also interprets and experiences this as something essential to her womanhood and something essential to her role as a woman in her Judaism and in regards to the celebration of the holiday of Simchas Torah. So an example of this is, I enjoy watching the men. Somehow the vibe touches the women too. Just thinking now, the Sefer Torah is really related to the men. They read it, open, carry, dance, write. For us, it's much more pnimi. It's internal. We carry the Torah in other ways. Our dance is different. It's intrinsic. Some women cited, there's roles for men and women. I don't feel the need to put on tefillin. This is the same. Or those that said, I feel we can access the joy and free-spirited connection while men have the responsibility of the weight of the Torah. We just have its spiritual effects, the glow, the joy. It feels like the idea of polarity, where it would feel less feminine to have to hold that physical weight. Or another woman who said, no need, I don't have to do what men do to enjoy the chag and feel connected. Or a woman who write, we have many ways to connect. I don't have a desire to connect in external ways. Another example of this perspective is this message of, we live in a very external world. This is a masculine energy. Dancing with the Torah is an external expression, like wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis. Internal is a more feminine trait. Women don't need external expressions as much as men. This is a great discussion to have on your show about the difference between chachma, which is a masculine trait and external, and bina, which is a feminine trait, internal. She goes on to explain the difference and says women's unique mitzvot are more private, internal, but much more fundamental to Judaism, and they affect others. Men's unique mitzvot are more public, but are less fundamental to Jewish life and hold less responsibility to other. It's really important to teach this to young people. In a very external world, people believe that the public is more important or fundamental to Jewish law, when in fact the opposite is true. Kashrut, Shabbos, private prayer are all way more fundamental and integral to Judaism than what goes on at shul. I agree with this perspective in terms of the delineation between men and women's roles in general in Judaism, but I don't see this perspective rooted in the sources of why women do not dance with the Torah, or even why women shouldn't dance at all. Because again, we're going to go into the halachic exploration of women dancing with the Torah, but women watching men dance as an expression of their femininity and their role as women in their Judaism is not something that I found in any of the sources about women's connection to the holiday. Let's look at the second section, but we'll explore that more deeply because I think that this is a perspective that many people have and that I respect and that I want to address. The second group of women enjoy watching. They don't necessarily subscribe spiritual significance to their watching as being integral to their womanhood or representing something specific about their womanhood and their Judaism. But these are women who enjoy watching the men dance. They enjoy watching their children. They feel that the joy on their men's side gives them a sense of joy of the holiday. They feel like participants through watching the men dance. And I'll give you some examples of this. I enjoy watching my son dance with so much joy, and I'm probably too self-conscious to dance anyways. Another woman, I live vicariously through my children dancing. That is more than enough for me. Another woman, it's so beautiful and joyful. I'm an Orthodox convert, so it's just a special tradition regardless. Another woman, I love it, watching the men dance. It makes me happy to see such joy. So this is the category of women who love watching the men dance, who feel a sense of participation in the holiday through watching the men dance. The next category are the women who are more ambivalent. They don't necessarily feel strongly alienated or anguished by the experience of watching the men dance, but they don't necessarily feel connected or like participants in this holiday through the experience of watching. Some quotes that I'll give you. I feel bored. It was nice and all, but it's just a social hour for the women. Half of us weren't even watching. Another woman, I don't usually enjoy it because most of the men are too drunk. Another woman, as a young girl, I loved watching. As a woman, I feel out of it. It doesn't really feel like my holiday. Another woman, I personally have no interest in seeing drunk men dancing. It's more of a men's holiday, and I'm cool with that. Or feels like nothing. All you do is stand around. So these are women who are not inspired by the men dancing, but are not incredibly perturbed by the men dancing. And so I put this in the category of ambivalent. The next section, women who feel anguished and alienated by the experience of watching men dance. I asked the question, if you go into a shul and there is no space for the women to dance, and you are put in a position where the only way to celebrate Simchas Torah is through watching the men dance, what is your experience of watching the men dance? Do you enjoy it? And if you do, tell me why. I want to hear. And if you don't enjoy it, tell me why. I want to hear. To me, there's no one way for a woman to celebrate holiday. I think that's actually something that is uniquely feminine, that there is a lot more spaciousness in the way that women participate in a holiday. The most important significance to me is that a woman feel like a true participant in her Judaism, and particularly in holidays that she has an equal portion in. To hear about these messages, it's no surprise, pained me deeply. To hear about the alienation and the anguish and the deep sense of pain that women felt by going to shul and not having a designated space for them to dance and participate in the holiday of the Torah, which they viscerally felt in their souls. Here are some of the messages I received from these women. I don't understand Simchas Torah. It's a men's holiday. I usually just stay home and read. I feel super disconnected. Another woman says, I feel horrible, frustrated, checked out, disconnected. Another says, I feel super disconnected. It just feels like a men's holiday with the women as bystanders. Another woman says, I went to shul like that and felt very bad and left out. Another, honestly, it's my least favorite holiday. I don't know how to connect. I don't go to shul for it. Another woman says, I enjoy it for a little bit, but then I start to feel weird, like the women don't have a place and we don't have our space to celebrate, and so it feels off to me. Another woman says, if I go into a shul that doesn't have a space for women to dance, I just leave. Spirituality, observance, holiness is not a spectator sport. Another woman wrote, and this one really stung, I absolutely dread it, and I'm normally cool with all things shul. It's so sad that all my single friends and myself feel like Simchat Torah is the day that makes us feel the worst. At least the women with kids have something to preoccupy themselves with, but not us. There can be a deep sense of pain for women who don't have loved ones on the men's side to watch dance, whether they are single or they were not yet blessed with children or whatever the case, or women who want to participate in the holiday and watching does not give them a sense of participation. There can be a real experience of alienation when women are given bleachers to sit and watch the men dance. And the fifth category that I received were women who said, I dance on Simchas Torah. It's a non-negotiable for me to participate. I won't go to a shul that doesn't have a women's side to dance on. And I feel invigorated, alive, and like a real participant in the holiday. An example of that, one woman says, in our shul, we have active women's dancing and it's incredible. Another, this is what the celebration of Simchas Torah is all about. And when I asked women what propels them to dance on Simchas Torah, period, what brings them to the dance floor to celebrate this holiday, the messages, of course, were stunning. I love the Torah. I desire the connection that comes along with dancing with others and singing together. It's an opportunity to let go and have a full body somatic experience of joy of Torah. Another woman says, because of the body's language of love, which transcends words, oftentimes the joy of Torah is something that the body needs to express where words cannot on a holy day like Simchas Torah. I just wish that we as women could experience true joy and dance like nobody is watching. Another woman, I also don't like the hypocrisy of the Torah officially belonging to everyone, except women, ? And now I want to look at women who don't not only want to dance on Simchas Torah, but also want to dance with the Torah. And I want you to stay open with me here. I am going to stay 100% true to the halachic sources on this topic and the Lubavitcher Rebbe's perspective on this. And I think it's incredibly important for us to understand where women are coming from when they say they want to dance with the Torah. It is very easy to write people off as wanting to be like the men when they say they want to do something that has traditionally been done by men. But I challenge you to really open your heart to the sincerity of those who yearn to dance with the Torah. And I want to read a message that brought me to tears. A woman wrote to me, "I don't like watching the men. I find it funny and don't like that it makes their dancing self-conscious. But I never liked the wannabe women's dancing either. It lacks meaning and is just there to pacify the women. Do I wish that I could touch and hold the Torah? Yes. During COVID, we had a minyan in our house and we had a Torah here. One day I needed to move it because I needed the space, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed. I asked, was told, of course you can hold it. I picked it up, and as I felt the bones of the Torah for the first time in my life, I burst into tears. I still cry when I think about it. It was like a long-lost reunion." I hope sharing those results and those messages that I received from women from around the world, from different backgrounds, will give us a more nuanced and complex understanding of where women are coming from on this issue. I received countless messages on this topic. It would take me hours if I were to read every single one. I tried to highlight those that either moved me deeply, although there were some that moved me deeply that I couldn't include because of time constraints, but those that showed trends in this experience for women on either end of the spectrum. Now we are going to be clearly differentiating between women's dancing, period, and women dancing with the Torah. My position on women dancing, period, is that every single shul, and we'll talk about this later, every single shul should have a space, in my opinion, for women to dance and participate in the joy of Simchas Torah. Anyone who enjoys and feels like a participant by watching the men dance should do so. I support that. But I do believe that every shul needs to have space for women who do want to dance. Now, when it comes to the issue of women dancing specifically with the Torah, now we're going to look at the halachic evolution of this topic, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's encounter with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, and the evolution of women's relationships to touching the Torah. We are not coming at this from a cultural perspective or from an emotional perspective, but from a halachic, legal, and factual perspective. And then we will come back to the emotional experience at the end. There is a famous story between Rabbi Shlomo Riskin and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Rabbi Shlomo Riskin is the founding member of the Lincoln Synagogue on the Upper West Side of New York, and he led that synagogue for 20 years. This was a synagogue that catered to people from all backgrounds, but it was considered Orthodox, and he would defer to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Moshe Feinstein for all of his halachic queries and questions. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe is actually the one who directed him and guided him to hold Rav Soloveitchik as his Rav for all halachic questions, for him to be the rabbinic figure that he deferred to for all matters of Jewish law. One year, on Shmini Atzeres, the women of Rabbi Riskin's shul asked him if they could dance with the Torah. He didn't know what to do. It was the holiday, so he couldn't call a rabbi to ask him. He had to make his own decision, and he says that he debated all night, and finally he decided that the women could dance with the Torah in a separate room that was closed and secluded in their own space. They could do hakafot on their own. So the women did hakafot in his shul that year, in this Orthodox synagogue. After the holiday was over, a local rabbi from young Israel spoke out against this and said Rabbi Riskin's shul is not considered Orthodox if he allowed the women of his shul to do that. Understandably, he was extremely perturbed and thrown off by this statement. He was trying to do the best he could. He made this decision, and now he was being slated as no longer being an Orthodox shul. So he went to his Rav Soloveitchik. According to his reports, Rav Soloveitchik told him, "You are absolutely still an Orthodox shul, and I'm going to come visit your shul and speak there to prove that I see your shul as Orthodox." It's interesting to note that later Rav Soloveitchik took the position that women cannot dance with the Sefer Torah on Simchas Torah, citing synagogue customs and how it's not simple to change synagogue customs. But he also acknowledged to Rabbi Riskin, who had made that decision, that he was still considered an Orthodox shul. This wasn't enough for Rabbi Riskin. He was extremely perturbed by this whole situation, and he went to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He records the yechidus, the private encounter, the personal meeting that he says lasted almost 2 hours with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he says the entire meeting spoke about women's place in Orthodox Judaism. A couple of the topics that were discussed during that meeting and some of the positions that the Rebbe took are as follows. The Rebbe told him, "In our time, it is important to involve women in every area of Yiddishkeit that we can." Another point the Rebbe made was women should be involved with learning Torah, including Torah Sheba'al Peh, including the oral Torah. Another thing that the Rebbe shared with him, that he spearheaded the campaign for women and girls to light Shabbat candles even before marriage, because this was his way of encouraging participation and involvement and a sense of engagement for women in their Judaism. He also told Rabbi Riskin that the place of women in the Orthodox world is a big challenge to the frum world today. And then he addressed this issue of women's dancing. Rabbi Riskin said, I spoke to Rav Soloveitchik. He said, it's okay, but it's still sitting on my heart. I don't know if I did the right thing. And he said at this point, he was open to changing his mind. He was open. He said he had enough sway in the community that he could go back to his community and say, I allowed it 1 year, but I conferred with my rabbis and I conferred with halachic leadership, and they said that it's not allowed. And so I retract my original position. He told the Rebbe, if I would have said no to these women, some of these women are so to the left that they would have left my synagogue and gone to conservative shul instead. They would not have stayed in my Orthodox synagogue, and I would lose my relationships with them and my ability to influence them. The Rebbe turned to him and told him in Yiddish, and I'm going to read it a direct quote, Nit nar meger das tan, nar imuz das tan. Not only are you allowed to do it, but you must do it, which is a completely radical statement of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He said, not only were you correct in doing it, not only were you allowed to do it, not only are you still an Orthodox shul, but you have to do it. The cost of not doing it is too high. You must allow these women to dance with the Torah. And the Rebbe cited the Shulchan Aruch, which we're going to take a deep dive into soon, which cites that women are accustomed not to go to shul, not to go to synagogue when they are bleeding, and not to say God's name, and not to touch the Torah, and says that the custom has changed, so therefore there's space to be lenient in this area. Here's where things get very interesting. After this meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Riskin received an urgent letter from the Rebbe retracting his original position with very strong language. This is a very rare occasion for the Rebbe. I don't know of any other circumstance where this happened. If you do know of one, I'd actually be curious to see it, so please email us. I'd love to see that. This is a very interesting scenario. At first, the Rebbe says, not only were you allowed to, but you should. This is the correct position to take. And then later, the Rebbe completely retracts his position and tells Rabbi Riskin as follows. Following our conversation, I was aware that an urgent correction was needed. The Paiskim, the halachic deciders, struggle with annulling this minhag, with this custom that the women took upon themselves. They were only lenient in regards to the women going to shul, to attending synagogue when they were bleeding, but because of their great anguish. Again, we're going to look at the source of that in a second. We have no power or authority to introduce innovations, especially in regards to the Torah scroll. Therefore, we cannot make any chidushim. We cannot innovate in minhag Yisrael, in the custom of the Jewish people, and women should not do hakafos with the Torah on Simchas Torah. Women should not dance with the Torah on Simchas Torah. The Rebbe says, I don't use the word restriction because this is not a restriction. Anything in the Torah is for our good. Please acknowledge receipt of this letter. I would like to add that we need to be very strict about Jewish customs. We see new customs in Judaism, like women teaching, girls lighting Shabbat candles before marriage, but there's precedent for all of this. But for Simchas Torah, there is no precedent for this. Although the emendations to the custom were made for Simchas Torah, for women to go to shul on Tishrei over the high holidays, but we don't see them doing this. We don't see them dancing with the Torah. And he adds, I have no issue in regards to you quoting me on this letter where I express my regret for my first answer, because the main thing is that this should be done according to the halacha, according to Jewish law. Essentially, the Lubavitcher Rebbe takes a very strong position in the opposite direction of what he originally told Rabbi Riskin. He says, I misspoke. I didn't represent the severity with which the rabbis took this custom that the women took upon themselves not to go into the synagogue when bleeding, etc. And the only reason why there was any amendment made to this custom is because of the women's great anguish. And so therefore, we cannot innovate in this direction, and we cannot change this custom, and women cannot dance with the Torah on Simchas Torah. And he also seems to be urging Rabbi Riskin to publicize this and to publicize his position on the matter. Whoa. A modern tzaddik addressing the issue of women dancing with the Torah. And there are many layers to this. I'm going to go deeper into this once we explore the halachic evolution of people dancing on Simchas Torah, period, and the evolution of this custom for women not to go into synagogue, not to say God's name, not to touch the Torah during the days that they were bleeding. Dancing with the Torah on Simchas Torah, the hakafos of Simchas Torah, is actually a custom that developed organically throughout time through the Jewish people's own personal evolution. It is not a mitzvah, it is not a commandment in the Torah, and it is not a halachic obligation. It is a custom that developed throughout time. We have an interesting historical record of this custom, which I want to share, from Samuel Pepys, who decided to pay a visit to a shul to see how Jews conducted himself during prayer. And as chance would have it, he ended up in a shul on the day of Simchas Torah, and he was flabbergasted by what he saw. This is an entry from his diary on October 14th, 1663. Their laws that they take out of the press, the ark, are carried by several men, 4 or 5, several burthens in all, and they do relieve one another, and whether it is that everyone desires to have the carrying of it, I cannot tell. Thus they carried it round about the room while such a service is singing. But Lord, to see the disorder, laughing, sporting, and no attention but confusion in all their service, more like brutes than people knowing the true God, would make a man forswear ever seeing them more. And indeed, I never did see so much or could have imagined there had been any religion in the whole world so absurdly performed as this. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks has a beautiful way of depicting and analyzing this diary entry from 1663 of a man observing the Jewish people dancing on Simchas Torah, the disarray, the chaos of this joy and love of the Torah that he witnessed in the synagogue. Jonathan Sacks says, joy in the celebration of that love, meaning the love of Torah, led King David to leap and dance when the ark was brought into Jerusalem, earning the disapproval of King Shaul's daughter Michal, and many centuries later led the Anglo-Jews of Crete Church Lane to dance on Simchas Torah to the disapproval of Samuel Pepys. When love defeats dignity, faith is alive and well. When love defeats dignity, faith is alive and well. This is the kernel of the beginning of the Jewish tradition evolving to allow for such chaos on a holy day of Simchas Torah, to allow for this dancing of taking the scrolls out of the ark, something that many rabbinical figures did at first consider to be a breach of synagogue mode of conduct and respect for the Torah itself. Let's look at those sources. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the Holy Temple, during Chol HaMoed, the intermediary days of the holiday, there was a Simchat Beis Teshueva. There was a celebration of the holiday of Sukkot. The Rambam records this tradition by saying that only the sages would dance and the general population would look on. A direct quote is that the great sages of Israel and the heads of the yeshivot and the Sanhedrin and the pious ones and the elders and men of notable deeds, they were the ones who would dance and clap and play music and rejoice in the Mikdash on the days of the holiday of Sukkot. But all the people, all the men and women came to see and hear. This was going on in the intermediary days. On Yom Tov itself, there was a problem with dancing because of the clapping that could happen. As it's quoted on the Talmud, this issue is prohibited because of the issue of pounding and clapping and dancing, which could be problematic on a Jewish holiday. However, as this custom developed, it was considered sufficiently weighty to override the rabbinic prohibition of not dancing and clapping on the holiday. And this custom of dancing on the holiday of Simchas Torah, not just in the intermediary days, was first recorded outside of Israel in Babylonia. And this custom was recorded of people dancing on Simchat Torah itself, the day where we complete the reading of the Torah and look forward to beginning it again. We see records of this development, of the ways people began to take the Torahs out of the Aron, out of the Ark, and begin to dance with them as an expression of celebration. In the Ramah, who speaks about taking out the Torahs, celebrating the Torah by dancing with it specifically. The Arizal instituted the actual tradition of a kafot, of circling the bima 7 times while dancing with the Torah. This is recorded in the Sefer of Chemdas Yamim. Different synagogues had different customs. This is something that is highlighted in different sources. Some would place the Torah on the bima and dance around it. Some would dance with the Torah. There's one source that I saw that spoke about how regular people were dancing with the Torah, and it was seen as problematic. So some Rabbanim were taking out less Torahs to avoid the Torah getting into the hands of the regular people. The development essentially began with just dancing at the Simchas Beis HaShuvah, only the sages themselves, then dancing on Simchas Torah, everyone getting involved in the dancing, and then the Torah coming out, being placed on the bima, people dancing around it, evolving into people actually picking up the Torah and dancing with it, to any person picking up the Torah and dancing with it, to the extent that even little boys sometimes will hold the Torah in a shul and dance with the Torah. So you see this progression of only the sages handling the Torah to any man being able to hold the Torah and dance with it. Understanding this evolution of people dancing on Simchat Torah is quite significant in our understanding of this issue. When you begin to understand that dancing on Simchas Torah is not a commandment, that the tradition itself has evolved throughout times based on the Jewish people's great love and excitement about completing the cycle and beginning a new one. Or as Jonathan Sacks said so beautifully, when love defeats dignity, faith is alive and well. The Jewish people were so moved by their love of the Torah that they were moved to dance. They were moved to take the Torah out of the ark and to do something that may have been considered a breach of synagogue conduct, may have been a breach of the norms of that time, but they stretched the tradition based on their pure love and joy of the Torah. They wanted to take the Torah and dance. This is the source of the tradition, to dance on Simchas Torah. As we already expressed, there's absolutely no halachic issue or barrier to women dancing on Simchat Torah on their side of the mechitza. And my position is that this is something that should be encouraged in all shuls, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But let's look at the barrier to women holding the Torah, because this is what we're focusing on right now. What is the barrier to women holding the Torah and dancing with it according to Jewish law? Most Orthodox poskim, most Orthodox rabbis take the position that women cannot dance with the Torah. There are some who take the position that they can. And the reason for this is that the barriers to women dancing with the Torah are those that develop through tradition as opposed to through a halachic commandment. Women not being allowed to dance with the Torah is not something that is written within the Torah itself. It is a tradition that developed by the Jewish people throughout time. Now, if you think, well, if it's just a tradition, let's do away with the tradition. Jewish law actually holds up tradition as something incredibly significant and something to uphold. And the way that traditions develop are through a natural evolution of people taking things upon themselves. And so the way that traditions also are rescinded is not through one quick decision, but also through a slow evolution. And when rabbinic figures make a decision to rescind a tradition or to abnegate it or absolve it in some way, it is by taking the cultural temperature of where the tradition stands and whether or not the reasoning for the tradition still stands, and through that deciding if it still has halachic weight. In this circumstance, most Orthodox Rabbanim take the position that the tradition of women not holding the Torah and not dancing with the Torah still holds halachic weight through the tradition. But it's incredibly important to understand the evolution of this tradition, to understand the hashkafic significance of this tradition. Lubavitcher Rebbe's ruling, or Rav Soloveitchik's ruling, or Rav Moshe Feinstein's ruling, stating that women should not dance with the Torah, is that based on a essential difference between women and men's relationship to the holiday of celebrating the Torah? Is this based on an essential feminine and masculine difference between our relationship to the text of the Torah? Or is this based in something else, which is the weight that we ascribe to traditions that have developed by the Jewish people? Briefly, because this is not the position that I'm going to be exploring in great detail, Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Moshe Feinstein cite synagogue custom as being the main barrier to women being able to dance with the Torah. Rav Soloveitchik's son-in-law, Rav Lichtenstein, expresses that he would be open to being done outside of the shul because that wouldn't impinge on synagogue custom. Rav Nachum Rabinovich, who is a Rav of Jonathan Sachs, expresses that he wouldn't change synagogue custom, but that if a Rav allowed to it, or if the communal norms shifted, or the majority of the community wanted it, he would be open to change in this direction. The Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Har Etzion, which I would quantify as being probably Haredi Dati Leumi, have expressed that in today's day and age, it makes sense to them for there to be some evolution on this. But the majority of Orthodox rabbinic figures still hold that women should not dance with the Torah. Although I had incredible conversations with women in my DMs, women who are extremely religious, defer to rabbinic leaders for all of their halachic questions, who spoke about their rabbanim and their poskim who do allow them to dance with the Torah and Simchas Torah. They are part of Orthodox shuls who see halacha as the final say where women do dance with the Torah. And again, the reason for this is that the reason why we don't is rooted in tradition, which holds much weight in halacha, but there's still space for some rabbanim to evolve in this direction. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, however, does not evolve in this direction, and I'm going to explain why. In the Lubavitcher Rebbe's letter, he cites Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 88, and I'm going to take a deep dive into that source to understand what the Lubavitcher Rebbe's reasoning is for why women cannot dance with the Torah. The Rebbe did not cite synagogue custom. He did not cite anything that points to a women's role in Judaism. He cites this custom that developed through women themselves, which was that women took upon themselves during the days that they bled, so not the entire days of their nida, but during the days that they bled, not to say God's name, not to enter into a synagogue, not to touch a Torah, and not to go into a cemetery. This is something that women took upon themselves. To understand this historically, we have to understand that women did not have hygienic products for their bleeding the way that we do today. So women often used non-absorbent rags to stop the flow of blood, and many women stayed home during the days of their period because very often there was leakage and it was a messier experience for women. As a result, we could understand why women may have had more of a sensitivity to saying God's name during those days, to touching the Torah, to being in synagogue, because they themselves were experiencing their periods in a much messier and visceral way, in a way that might be different nowadays because of the different hygienic products that we have. Now, this is a custom. It's very important to note that this is a custom that women took upon themselves. This is not something that was imposed on them by halacha or by any of their local rabbanim. It was something that women personally felt. They felt a sensitivity to themselves during this time, and they felt that they wanted to create a distance between them and certain holy spaces because of the experience of their bleeding. In many ways, this is somewhat of an irrational custom that developed, and the reason for that is that we know very clearly from the Rambam that a Sefer Torah is not Mekabel Tumah. A Sefer Torah cannot receive impurity. So even if a woman is touching a Sefer Torah in a time when she is in this impure nida state, she cannot transfer that impurity to the Sefer Torah. In addition, it used to be the custom that when a man had a wasteful emission of seed, he would go to the mikveh, into the ritual waters, to immerse himself to become pure as well. So you would think that there would be an equal problem or equal issue with a woman who is in a state of nida in her impure days and a man in a state of impurity from wasteful emission. But men never took this custom upon themselves not to touch the Torah in that state. And so therefore, there is no custom that correlates a man's state of impurity to his relationship to the Torah, although he experiences the same measure of impurity throughout his life. Women, on the other hand, had this greater sensitivity to the Torah during this time, and they took this custom upon themselves. Now you might be wondering, well, we don't have all parts of that custom anymore, right? Women say God's name when they have their periods. Women go into synagogue. Women go into cemeteries, etc. So what evolved in this tradition? The Ramah says very clearly that the tradition has evolved throughout time, and we do still keep elements of this custom now, but women do go to shul during the time of their bleeding because of their great anguish that they would experience if they were barred entry during the high holidays when everyone else was praying inside. I want to actually read the language from the Ramah. Again, I think the more grounding we can have in the sources, the clearer idea and understanding we will have of this topic. The Ramah says, and this is an English translation, the Ramah says, there are those who wrote that a menstruant woman in the days when she sees blood may not enter the synagogue or pray the Amidah or mention God's name or touch the Torah scroll. Please note that he specifically highlights the days when she sees blood as opposed to her full days of nida, specifically the time when she is bleeding. And there are those who say that she is permitted in all of those, and that is the correct opinion. He cites Rashi. But the practice in these lands is according to the first opinion, so we still hold the custom. And in the clean days, which means after menstruation but before immersion, the Shiva Nikian, so she's no longer bleeding, but she is still in that state of impurity, it is permitted to do these things. So it's only problematic when she's in a state of impurity. And even in a place where they are stringent during the high holidays and similar days where many assemble to go to the shul, they are permitted to go to the synagogue like the rest of the women, for it would cause great sadness for them that all are assembled and they stand outside. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which is the Shulchan Aruch that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, synthesized with later commentaries, he uses the language, they took a custom upon themselves, and he highlights, and I'll read this in English, Ki lehen li'itzavan gadol shakol misaspen vehein yamdu chutz. It would have caused them great anguish for everyone to be gathered inside, and they were standing outside. This is the reason for the dissolution of certain parts of the custom still remain. So we see that this is a custom that women took upon themselves, very likely based on their hygienic experience of their period and a heightened sense of sensitivity to the Torah. Parts of this have evolved and dissolved due to the great anguish that parts of this custom would cause women, namely that they would not be able to enter the shul, the synagogue, when everyone else was praying. And due to this, the Lubavitcher Rebbe cites that it is still halachically problematic for a woman to dance with the Torah because we have not seen an evolution in the area of women touching the Torah when nida. You may ask, not all women who go to shul are in the days of their period. Due to reasons of tznius and modesty, we don't want anyone to be able to differentiate between women who are on their periods or not, so everyone abstains from holding the Torah. As we saw in the letter, which I read parts of it to you, the Lubavitcher Rebbe took a very strong stance on upholding the parts of this tradition that have survived throughout the years. And the reason is because we give enormous halachic significance to the traditions of the Torah. And yes, there are parts of this tradition that have evolved over time, but there are parts that have not yet evolved. According to the Rebbe, we cannot create a clean aberration from this custom. Yes, this custom is something that women took upon themselves because of their own sensitivity, and perhaps now women may not have that sensitivity or may feel differently about it, but regardless, there cannot be a revolution in this tradition. If there is any unfolding of this, it would have to be completely organic and something that happens slowly over time. Let's look and analyze some of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's language to Rabbi Riskin. When he expressed his retraction of his original position, he cited the fact that the rabbinic figures didn't just do away with the custom, they looked carefully at the custom and only did away with the parts of the custom that caused the women great anguish. Itzaban gadol is the language that's used in the Shulchan Aruch. They only evolved in the areas of this custom that caused the women itzaban gadol, great anguish. And he shows they took this custom very seriously. And because in the Shulchan Aruch, this custom is taken so seriously, although it originated within the women themselves, and although it evolved over time, he took the position that it could not be edited or amended. Even the fact that you see this custom recorded in Shulchan Aruch, which is the most widely accepted book of laws of Jewish halacha, is proof to us that a custom is something to be taken seriously and is not a casual thing. So What is our position with women dancing on the Torah in general? What is our hashkafic perspective on women's relationship to Simchas Torah based on all of the sources that we just visited of the evolution of the custom of dancing with the Torah period, the evolution of the custom of women not touching the Torah, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe's exchange with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin? What is our position on whether or not women dance with the Torah, why they don't dance with the Torah, and what that means about Jewish womanhood? This is where I want us to really sink in to holding the great nuances of this issue. And in an analysis of the exchange between Rabbi Shlomo Riskin and the Rebbe, this original encounter where the Rebbe encouraged him to allow the women to dance, and then the letter where the Rebbe clearly and powerfully and stringently retracted his original position, Rabbi Greenberg analyzes and comes with an interesting perspective where he says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a tzaddik, and in his retraction, you see a depth to his position and a nuance to his position and a complexity to his position, which can help us understand it more deeply. I'm not going to go in full detail into his analysis, but the nugget that I want to take is that he essentially says that first the Lubavitcher Rebbe took the most lenient position, and then he took the strictest position to showcase that even if ultimately we take the strictest position, we have to hold the nuances and the complexity of this issue and to recognize that there's actually no deep halachic commandment for women not to be able to dance with the Torah. Regardless, the way that the tradition has developed over time has created a halachic significance to women dancing with the Torah, but the way that we understand why women don't dance with the Torah has to hold the ability of the full spectrum of this issue within halacha and Jewish law for many reasons, and I want to share some of my perspectives. One is that we can understand that there are true Orthodox Rabbanim who do paskin that women are allowed to dance with the Torah. They may be the minority, but they do exist, and I fully believe that Shivim Panim LaTorah, there are many facets to the Torah, and that can be a true expression of God's will. And we have to recognize that and not write synagogues off where God-fearing, halachic rabbis and leaders make the decision that that is right for their community. That is also important so that when women express the desire to dance with the Torah, a soulful, authentic, heartfelt desire to dance with the Torah, even if they are part of communities where that is not the halachic position, we should not equate that desire with the desire to break Shabbos. We should not equate that desire with the desire to do something that is explicitly against halacha in a deep foundational way, because there is no correlation between the tradition that women took upon themselves throughout time and other prohibitions in the Torah that are essential to understanding of our roles in Judaism. If the women that the Ramah writes about, who experienced great anguish and therefore absolved themselves of not being able to enter shul when they were bleeding, did not express their spiritual anguish around a custom that their grandmothers and great-grandmothers took on, we would still not be saying God's name during the time of our period. We would still be barred entry from shul during the times of our period. And we would still be upholding the custom to its completion. We see how the great anguish of the women who desperately, urgently wanted to enter shul during the high holidays is actually what created the evolution of this custom and minhag. So how can we say that a woman's desire to dance with the Torah is coming from a misguided, embittered, secular perspective on her Judaism, where she wants to express something that is contrary to her essential connection to God? We can say it is a true, authentic connection, heartfelt desire to dance with the Torah, to be connected to Hashem, to viscerally express the joy of Simchas Torah. And if technically in the community that she is in, it is not halachically allowed, we need to find ways for her to experience complete participation and engagement with the holiday of Simchas Torah in a way that she can find fulfilling without breaking the halachic barriers within the community that she is in. I, for example, am a Chabad woman. Halacha has the final say in my life. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's encounter and exchange with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin is extremely pivotal and integral to me. And yet, I still experience moments of sadness around my inability to hold and dance with the Torah. I really deeply related to that woman who spoke about feeling the bones of the Torah for the first time, how she cried, how it felt like a long-lost reunion. I yearn for that long-lost reunion with the Torah. I yearn to dance with the Torah. I yearn to be able to express my celebration of the Torah in a visceral, embodied way, where I get to hold the object of my love and guidance and desire and connection to God on Simchas Torah. Let's relook at the different trends that we saw in the polls that we took of different women's experiences of Simchas Torah. And let's address what the end game is, or what the hashkafic deduction is from every single woman's experience. To the woman who is content with watching the men dance, who enjoys watching the men dance, who feels that this is her way of participation on Simchas Torah, I think that is beautiful. I think that the most important thing is that a woman feels a sense of participation to the holiday of Simchas Torah. There's a beautiful story of the Lubavitcher Rebbe where a little girl started singing at a Farbrengen, at a spiritual gathering, and everyone around her began to shush her. And the Rebbe sent a message to say, don't shush her, tell her to clap instead. Because the point is not that she shouldn't be participating, that she shouldn't be involved, that she shouldn't be engaged. The point is that she should be completely engaged in a way that still honors the barriers of halacha. So the same thing is true on Simchas Torah. If you are part of a community where it is halachically problematic for a woman to dance with the Torah, the main thing is that you should be engaged and participating, and that there should be a way for you to feel that the joy of Simchas Torah is yours. If you participate in the joy of Simchas Torah by watching, I think that is beautiful. There is not one way to celebrate. And to the women who are ambivalent, who kind of shrug their shoulders at it all, say, listen, it's a men's holiday, but it doesn't bother me. I talk with my friends. I socialize. It's not the biggest deal. I do wonder what message we're sending our daughters in that position. What message are we sending our daughters about their relationship to the Torah? If Simchas Torah for a woman is about socializing with friends, about being a little checked out from the celebration, and even if we're okay with that, even if we love spending time with the women in our community, even if we kind of just are peripherally engaged and involved and don't feel like full participants, what message do we send to the next generation of women? I know that any Chabad house setting, any setting where non-Orthodox women are going to come and witness and be a part of the Simchas Torah holiday, there is always enormous priority placed on putting up a mechitza and ensuring that the women's experience of Simchas Torah is not simply a bystander energy, where she's not simply sitting on bleachers and watching the men dance. And the reason is because we don't want to send a message, which is not true, that women have less of a role or a place in the joy of dancing with the Torah. Are we trying to put on a show for people who don't come from an Orthodox background? Absolutely not. We just want to represent the true essence of Judaism, which is that Simchas Torah is a women's holiday too. And even if we don't dance with the Torah, we certainly dance and we certainly partake in the joy of the Torah. In Orthodox shuls, we have to be careful about sending that message to women too. Not necessarily because it will turn them away from Judaism, but because it will distance them from their love of Torah, because it will send the message that the Torah belongs to them less, that the text of the Torah is not theirs, that the joy of the holiday is not as relevant to them. And this ambivalence and this distance and this disconnect from the celebration is problematic to me on a cultural level. It sends the message to women that this holiday is not yours, and it sends the message to our daughters that the Torah does not belong to you in the same way that it does to men. This is not true to the essence of Torah, and this is not true to the halachic sources as to why women don't dance with the Torah. There's no barrier to women dancing on Simchas Torah. In fact, I would argue that the Lubavitcher Rebbe's position in encouraging women to constantly be participating and engaging in every element of Judaism they could would be that the women's side should have a boisterous, lively, engaged dancing on Simchas Torah. And to the woman who feels alienated or at times has felt anguished about the state of the women's section on Simchas Torah, I want to say, from one woman to another, you do not have less of a chelek, less of a portion in the joy of Simchas Torah. This holiday is yours. As a Chabad woman, I do not dance on Simchas Torah with the Torah because of a sensitivity that my grandmothers had, but it is their great anguish which ultimately caused the tradition to evolve. And so to any of us who do feel alienated or anguished, I say, dance, pull other women into the circle, be that force of joy and create an energy on the women's side of the mechitza, of joy, of energy, of celebration, of the completion of the Torah and the beginning of the new one. Your joy, your desire to dance is pure. Your desire to have a Simchas Torah where you are engaged and involved is pure and true and a call from your soul to move in an embodied way to the joy of your soul on Simchas Torah. I think it's very important to look at whether or not the spiritualization of this tradition of women not dancing with the Torah is rooted in any of our sources, and particularly in the source that the Lubavitcher Rebbe quoted in his letter. Now, obviously, there's a differentiation between dancing on Simchas Torah halachically and dancing with the Torah specifically. But for the sake of the spiritualization of this custom, I'm going to collapse those, because the tradition for women not dancing with the Torah is not based on an essential difference between men and women. It is based on a custom that was taken on by women that has real halachic weight. But this custom was taken on by women themselves. This is not something that was imposed on the women, and that is critical to understand because it helps us understand whether or not this is a top-down perspective on an inherent difference between a man and woman's relationship to the holiday of Simchas Torah. And for us to hold the complexity of this issue, as Rabbi Greenberg said, to see the Rebbe's broad perspective, to be able to say, I don't dance with the Torah, but not because I have any less of an essential connection to the joy of the Torah, not because the Simchas Torah is a men's holiday, not because the Torah is not mine. Not all areas of Judaism fall under the umbrella of separate men and women's roles. Of course, there are areas of Judaism where this is clearly the case. But when we begin to put every element of a woman's Judaism into these two categories, this is a man's role, this is a woman's role, without actually diving into whether or not this is because this is not a woman's role, we create a sense of alienation and anguish and pain for women that does not need to exist. We cannot create extra fences around the Torah that are not there. We cannot create explanations and apologetics and spiritual significance to things that are not rooted in our sources. The Lubavitcher Rebbe cites the tradition that women took upon themselves. He does not cite anything that points to the difference of women's connection to the holiday of Simchas Torah. If anything, in his encounter with Rabbi Riskin, he emphasized how important it is for women to be engaged and active participants in every single area of their Judaism that they are halachically able to. We have to prioritize living up to the Rebbe's vision for Jewish womanhood, which is that every area that is open to us halachically is one where we find complete participation and engagement with. Simchas Torah is yours. The Torah is yours. Celebrate the Torah this holiday in whatever way your Rav guides you to. If you celebrate and participate in the holiday by watching and enjoying that, I honor that completely. If you do feel ambivalent about your experience in Simchas Torah, is it possible that if there was a vibrant dance floor for women, that you might get involved for a dance or two, that you might allow yourself to experience the visceral emotion of joy on Simchas Torah? The entire Jewish people are elevated when women participate in the joy of Simchas Torah. The entire Jewish people are elevated when women are deeply engaged with their Judaism. This Simchas Torah, I am going to be dancing. This Simchas Torah, I'm going to be celebrating the enormous gift of the Torah in my life, and I will be using my feet to draw down the infinite energy of the Torah in my life. And so I invite you, this Simchas Torah, to dance with me. And even if you choose not to dance, to participate in the holiday, to recognize how it is as much your birthright as any other holiday in the year, and to know that your Judaism is yours, that the Torah belongs to you, that the text of the Torah, that the physical weight of the Torah, that the physical gift, the enormity of that gift is as much your gift as anyone else's. This holiday is yours. This joy is yours. Dance with me, and let's create communities where it becomes the norm for women to dance and to celebrate. That when anyone would make a statement like Simchas Torah is a men's holiday, we wouldn't even know where to place that. We wouldn't even have a culture where that could take root or where that could find its validation. Simchas Torah is the Jewish people's holiday. This joy belongs to us all. May we all have the ability to tap into the enormous joy of this day, the completion of the cycle of study and the beginning of a new one, the celebration that first caused Jews to grab the Torah and dance with it, the one that Samuel Pepys noted as being absolutely chaotic and absurd, but as Jonathan Sacks so beautifully said, is an expression of a faith and a joy that just can't help but dance. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If there are sources that you would like to share with me, I would love to hear your feedback. So email us at info@humanandholy.com with your thoughts on this. My hope is that regardless of what community you're in, regardless of how you celebrate Simchas Torah, you deeply and truly feel that you as a woman, or if you are a man listening, that the women in your community truly have a place in the holiday of Simchas Torah, and that we prioritize that women feel that and know that and recognize how deeply sourced that is in the halachic texts and sources of the Torah and in the evolution of our celebration of this gorgeous, joyful holiday. Chag Sameach. Gediente. I'll see you next week.